Hi, Lester, Wushu engineer. Apologies to the vanishingly small number of people who might be regular viewers of my channel. We're currently working quite hard on the Wushu scientists' PhD study, which is being done in collaboration with the University of Southern Queensland and the Martial Arts Research and Testing Laboratory, or Martel. We've recently begun the first of multiple training intervention studies, and so have entered the long dark.
We must face the long dark of Moria.
The insane amount of work that we have in front of us, in combination with our pending trip to Japan for the Wushu scientists to present at the International Society of Biomechanics Conference, means that we won't be seeing the light at the end of this tunnel until sometime next year. So my video uploads are going to be sporadic and delayed, although I don't think that this is necessarily going to bother anyone. Over the course of my channel's lifespan, I've uploaded many different videos looking at aspects of human martial performance and how it can be enhanced technologically and methodologically through the use of modernized training protocols taken from ancient traditional combat training systems. Amongst many other aspects, I've looked at enhancing strength, pain tolerance, striking potential, and response times. Now, in many of those videos featuring response times, I've performed different kinds of response time tests of my own to demonstrate my own personal performance metrics. I'm a professional engineer, my wife is a professional scientist, and our Wushu Engineer channel is, you could say, predominantly a vehicle for us to present scientific research that we are either directly involved in or that is of great interest to us. To that end, I do not embellish results or research papers presented on my channel, because embellishment of results is a form of falsification, and falsification of results is anathema to the scientific method and to scientific advancement. In fact, I even refuse to use overly emotive language or any kind of sophistry or linguistic manipulation to even imply that something is more than what it really is. Because of this, the topics that I present and the way that I present them can sometimes appear very dry and boring, despite the fact that the results themselves are often profoundly interesting and sometimes mind-blowingly significant. Please understand that this is a deliberate choice of mine. I deliberately avoid being entertaining if the cost of that entertainment is my professional credibility. I don't jump about on screen hooting and screeching like a gibbon, as do many other presenters on YouTube. Nor do I misrepresent topics to drive up interest. So I try to steer away from clickbait video titles, for instance. I do this knowingly, as I said, at the cost of likes, views, and subs. My professional integrity and personal sense of dignity is more valuable to me than a thriving YouTube channel. So comparing my content with that of many other content creators is a bit like comparing a nutritious but simple meal to a big box of elaborate junk food. You know that in practice, the majority of people are going to choose the junk food over the nutritious meal. I believe that many of my videos have suffered because of this. They've been ignored because either I didn't lead viewers by the nose to force them into drawing conclusions I want them to draw, or I didn't do enough of a song and a dance about the topic. I believe that my videos presenting my response times and other aspects of traditional response time training have suffered significantly because of this. And it is a pity, because the results of the tests that we've performed in the past are actually quite profound. It's also possible that the average viewer, or even the average martial artist who might be viewing my content, may not understand just how important combat response times are to overall combat performance. Perhaps they are typically more interested in characteristics like strength, fitness, explosive impact performance, and the like. The reality is that in an extreme, fast-paced environment, such as in a fight, being able to respond even 10 milliseconds faster than your opponent is very advantageous. If your opponent has already launched a successful attack against you in half the time that it would take for you to respond to the attack, how much do your other combat characteristics actually matter at that point? It should be stated though that factors like strength, fitness, technique, experience, tactics and the like play an extremely important role in fighting, and so unless the response time difference between opponents is very significant, it can often go unnoticed. But when we look at the world of esports, response time becomes a far more important delineator between poor, average, and elite sports players, esports players. Now, not too long ago, one of the channels that I like to listen to, Upper Echelon, posted a video entitled "Your Video Games Will Never Be Fair Again." Although I like following his content because it is well researched and interesting, there is typically little to no crossover between our two channels with respect to the type of content that we produce. This video was an exception. In it, he discussed the type of cheat software that can currently be leveraged to play computer games in order to artificially boost a player's response times. The main point of his video was that any player with a bit of cunning and subterfuge could use this cheat software to subtly boost their performance so that their cheating could go virtually undetected. This is because they could be purposefully throttling the use of the cheat software such that their response times, though fast, were still within the range of what would be considered human. Now, I am not an esport player, nor am I a serious gamer. I do enjoy playing video games from time to time, but I don't typically play AAA games like Call of Duty or the like. I'm more interested in indie-style games. But for me, Upper Echelon discussed some really interesting and relevant details in his video from about the 5-minute mark, and I encourage you to watch his video for full context here. I saw this as an opportunity to reframe some of the data and results that I've shared on my older response time videos, and hopefully get the relevance of what I've shared across to my viewers with better comparison points and a different perspective on the data. So as I said, I encourage you to watch Upper Echelon's video, but basically he relates information about average and fast human response times, very similar to the data that I've shared on my past videos. At this point in the video, he discusses human response times, citing research as well as online resources for human response time measurement. Now, in summary, based on his data sources, he states that average human response times vary between 270 and 290 milliseconds. Now, just briefly to explain what that means, it means there is a delay between a stimulus, let's say a light coming on or something flashing onto a screen, and the point at which the person responds, often by pressing a button. And that, and on average, the average human response time, in other words, the delay between the signal being received by the eye and interpreted by the brain and the person pressing a button, is typically between 270 and 290 milliseconds. He also mentions that slow response times are in the low 300 millisecond range. Fast response times are in the range of 160 to 170 milliseconds. In addition, he states that esports players have response times that vary between 160 to 180 milliseconds. So fast human response times. And that their response times can be as low as 140 milliseconds in some cases. Now, while I'm not going to play any really long clips of his video, I would like to play a short 30-second segment of Upper Echelon's video that comes at about the 6-minute mark.
Some people, whether by training, persistence, or some kind of genetic superiority even, are able to have a reaction time that borders on 100 milliseconds. It's an incredibly small number of people, but there are human beings out there, and esports players in particular, that can achieve something like 120 millisecond reaction times, or even 115, 110. Again, this is an incredibly difficult thing to do, often requiring the most advanced hardware a person can buy in addition to physical dexterity, but it's certainly possible.
It's at this point, now that you have the context for what response times mean in terms of what is fast, what is slow, and what is bordering on the ridiculous, that I can share my own response times. And you'll see them in the plot and the screen now. Bear in mind that the tests that we performed, although not performed for a particular scientific study, were performed here in our martial arts research and testing laboratory under scientific controls, using calibrated laboratory timers and under strict scientific observation. If you would like to see how these values were measured, check out those earlier videos, but I'll have some clips playing silently in the background for greater context. As you can see from the plot, which is a compilation of data from various sources and studies, along with my own average and fastest response times, my response times are very unusual, unusually fast, or unusually short, if you're talking directly about the actual response times. Typically, when response times are measured, they are measured with respect to response to a visual stimulus. So if you look at my average and fastest visual response times, you will see that my average visual response time is approximately 125 milliseconds, while my fastest visual response times are below 100 milliseconds. Remembering that what are described as fast human response times vary between 160 and 180 milliseconds, with very fast response times being around the 140 millisecond range. I know I said that I won't use emotive language, but perhaps you'll forgive me if I say that an average response time of 125 milliseconds is ridiculous. For an esports player, a response time like this would be cause enough to strongly suspect that they were using the cheat software that Upper Echelon mentioned in his video. Upper Echelon in his video did not even care to mention that some people may have response times that are below 100 milliseconds, because that would be almost unheard of. Instead, he indicated that some exceptional people may have response times that approach 100 milliseconds. My fastest response times at sub 100 milliseconds might thus be considered inhuman, and if noted in an esports competition, would probably be considered pretty much proof positive of cheating. Now, of course, there's more to being an esports player than response time alone. My unusually fast visual response times alone would not be enough to make me some kind of esports champion. Clearly, there are actual game-dependent controls and control combinations that must be mastered, along with winning strategies and tactics, not to mention the passion to pursue such a career. I have absolutely no interest in esports. The same could be said about actual physical fighting, where response time, although important, is certainly not all that you need in order to be effective. But in esports, based on what I have seen and read, fast response times seem to be even more closely correlated with success than in physical fighting. So why is my response time so fast? Well, it's a combination of factors. My genetics certainly would play a role. But in my case, I believe that the effect on response times that can be traced to any natural genetic advantages that I possess has been almost completely eclipsed by the effect that my martial arts training has had on my response times. I've spoken about the kind of traditional training techniques that can be leveraged to improve response times in my other videos, so I'm not going to speak about it at length here. However, it can be summed up as a combination of two basic approaches: physical reflex training and mental discipline. The practitioner's body is trained to maximize the speed and strength of nervous signaling, minimize spurious muscular activity and unnecessary muscular tension, so that the body can move as quickly as possible once the intention is signaled. In addition, the mental discipline of basic meditative control is practiced in order to turn the practitioner's mind from what in some people is essentially a dysfunctional, slow, dim-witted entertainment facility into a consciously controlled precision instrument. So would it be possible to leverage these training methods to improve an esports player's response times? Absolutely, it would. Of course, the esports player would have to commit to a very strict round of training in order for it to have any effect. It would be possible to approach, replicate, or even exceed my response time performance given enough training. I personally don't think that just any esports player would be game to take on board the additional training this would entail, though. I would say that they would have to be interested in the martial arts training in and of its own self in order to properly commit. But still, it would be quite possible. Now, I'd like to refer you back to my original performance plot, which I'll have displayed on the screen again. You will notice that I also have some personal performance data for my tactile response times on the plot. Now, tactile response times differ from visual response times in that instead of responding to a visual signal, you're responding to a tactile signal. In other words, some signal transferred via touch before responding by pressing a button or performing some action. You may notice that those results, my tactile response time results, blow my visual response times completely out of the water. My average tactile response time is 80 milliseconds, while my fastest tactile response times are below 50 milliseconds. This is inhumanly fast. But the crazy difference between my tactile response times and my visual response times is supported by other studies that looked at the difference between the two. Now, recalling what Upper Echelon was saying about esport response times, he mentioned that a response time of 160 milliseconds was fast. Now imagine an esports player with a natural, unassisted response time of 80 milliseconds on average. Twice as fast as what would be considered fast. Now, of course, as I've already mentioned, that would first require the esports player to be actively engaged in this form of specific traditional martial arts training. However, it would also require adaptations to be made in terms of the sensory feedback provided to the player. The standard controls would have to be seriously modified to provide predetermined tactile feedback to the player. I envision perhaps a hybrid tactile, sound, and visual feedback system that could integrate with popular esports games like Call of Duty, Fortnite, or League of Legends, for instance. For those of you who played the old tabletop role-playing versions of Shadowrun or Cyberpunk, think of this as a type of hacker's cyber deck. Perhaps call it a tactile deck or TacDeck. How about that? General game feedback with low response time criticality would be ported by the TacDeck to conventional outputs like screens, for instance. Game feedback with mid-tier response time criticality might be ported by the TacDeck to auditory feedback systems, perhaps specific audio signals to a set of headphones, for instance. However, response time critical feedback would be ported by the TacDeck to devices that provided, perhaps situated all over the esport player's body at specific locations, that provided haptic, vibratory, or electric microshock feedback to players in specific body locations. Perhaps these sensors will, or at least, sorry, these transducers would be located at specific locations that the esports player was trained to interpret in specific ways. Maybe left, right, upper, middle, lower, right arm, left arm, etc. Alternatively, specific learnt tactile signals set as a type of haptic Morse code, perhaps, could be broadcast to a single location on the esports player's body. But that would incur a processing time penalty because, of course, those signals would first have to be interpreted to make sense of them before the player could respond. So it would slow the response time down from that of a simple tactile signal. At this stage, I am unaware of anyone in the esports industry who has tried to modify the feedback and controls to favor tactile responses in this way. Let me know in the comments below if you're aware of any kind of real investigation into this. But based on my own results and the results presented in other scientific papers, even without any kind of specific traditional martial arts training, a 30 to 40% improvement over visual response times can be expected from tactile response times. Some research into the rules of various esports competitions would obviously be required, but I can't see why ultimately using tactile feedback along with visual feedback would be disallowed, because it still represents the individual player's unaugmented response, just visual and tactile instead of purely visual. So perhaps that might be part of the future of esports, unaugmented esports, so that is the non-cheating variety of esports. And it would be interesting if something like this would actually be trialed, maybe a series of scientific studies into esports players using more tactile feedback in their gameplay. Anyway, I thought this was an interesting topic, and as I said, it was an opportunity for me to reframe and present previous research that we've done again, hopefully to get the point across that actually there are ways to train response times that push your unaugmented human response times up into what could be considered an enhanced state. So I hope this was of interest to my viewers, and I'll see you all again next time. Cheers.